American studios with Scandinavian credits, sloppy of cuts and hasty of edits, a soundtrack an edgelord would consider fringe, and dialogue that would make George Lucas cringe. Double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble, as the lights dim and the projector hums, something hack job this way comes.
Nice there. Now,
Yeah, I wrote that in 5 minutes, and it's still too good for this
just like
friggin'
this
movie.
movie.
Yeah. Oh my god,
But
this
say,
friggin' movie.
what movie are we talking about, Joe?
It's 2 weeks ago we covered Avengers Endgame, and I was just like, Endgame, whatever. I don't need to write an intro. It's only like the end of a cinematic era. This week we're like, oh, Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunter. Oh, I totally have to write an intro to that.
Well,
So
it was it was a bit interesting. I know like you're not a big fan of Rotten Tomato scores and IMDb scores, but this was one of the very few movies that I've seen whose media scores are varied, like completely. The Rotten Tomato score was about 15%, and the IMDb score is 52%. So I thought that was weird because usually they say about consistent, even though like
right.
the information's like a little touchy on it can be taken with a grain of salt. But I think but they're still usually consistent as far as the numbers go. And I think this was like really weird that one people who would go on one site they would just hate it, just immensely hate it, and then other people would be like, it's a coin flip. It's a coin flip.
I I'm just gonna warn you guys up front. I'm actually going to say a decent amount of good things about this movie, surprisingly, because I thought it did have some potential. There are a lot of things about the plot that I was surprised that were as good as they were, or maybe not good, but like competent. And maybe that's a problem that they were competent. I feel like this movie should have been a little bit more incompetent. Um, but yeah, don't let my faint praise fool you. This movie is not worth your time. Don't watch it. I, I I was bored through most of it. It's just the dialogue is really the biggest problem.
Yeah, that and
Um,
a lot of gaps, a lot of just
yeah.
gaps of nothing.
Yeah. Well, I before I don't want to get too deep into this because I want to just do a little brief little hello. Maybe talk about our week a little bit. James, did you encounter anything this week that you want to talk about?
Well, I have a bit of a confession to make. I have not fully watched The Office, and I'm trying to reprimand that. I'm trying to fix that
Ooh.
issue right there. We're about on, I think, season 6, and it's. I, I keep getting the hints of like why I haven't watched The Office. I can't deal with cringe in movies. To be honest, I have to get up and I have to walk out of the room because for some reason, like yes, we all know they're actors and they're playing a part and they play it so well that I feel like they're actual real people, and then I have to get up because I can't deal with the cringe. And The Office is definitely like one of those off and on that I can only deal with small doses. But I'm
And
trying to power through it.
this is the American Office.
Yes, with Steve Carell.
I'm guessing you don't watch a lot of British comedy.
No, and I definitely I heard that actually you're probably the one. I think you were the one that told me that the British Office is just way more
It
of
is,
that intensity.
and it's a lot of people just they swear that the British Office is better. Yes, but like to me, it's completely apples and oranges. Like the British Office is a fantastic example of what it is, but it didn't it like the American Office is a freaking institution. I mean, it's a comparison of like there are 12 episodes I think of the British Office, which is pretty standard for British TV. There are like it's up there in like the 160s for the American Office.
There's
It's
like 9
completely
seasons.
different.
Yeah. Whew.
Yeah, it's on completely different levels, and they both are pretty good examples of what they do. I do think that the American Office does decrease in quality after Michael Scott leaves. Spoilers, but I don't think that it after that point ceases to be worth watching. I think at every point that show is worth watching, even if it's not at its best. It's still a damn good show.
Yeah, and
Um,
I don't want to go too much into it, but there was one more thing I wanted. I think it's because so I watched a bit of it before I was hired by a department, and then now I'm watching it after I'm hired by a department, and it's definitely it hits a lot more home because I know a Michael Scott in that I work with, and who's
yeah,
it's and so like it feels a lot more real, and it makes it hurt more if that makes any sense.
Yeah, if you like the American Office, maybe try the British Office. I don't know if you specifically don't like the cringe, maybe not. But like there are, I mean, the British Office is good, but there are better examples of British cringe
I
humor.
say I love
Like
the IT Crowd. That was a really good show. I don't know if
I
it's as
haven't seen that.
cringy, but
Is that that's not particularly? I mean, there's some cringy. It's
I know it's
British, but like
British. Yeah.
if you really want to torture yourself because you don't like the cringe, you got to check out a little show called Peep Show.
Okay.
Oh my god. It's one of my favorite shows of all times. It's so funny. And it makes like some of the absolute best episodes of that show. You just are so uncomfortable. You want to like die. But yeah, it's a great show.
I said I'll have to take a look at it when I'm like in that mood and to be able to show like I gotta force myself to sit down and watch it.
Right.
But aside from that, what have you been watching, Joe? Anything?
Well, I'm in a good mood today. I walked into work today, and the Star Wars prequels were playing in the break room for
Oh
some
boy.
godforsaken reason. So I could like every time now and again when it got less busy, I could pop back there, grab a drink of water, and just engross myself in Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen trying really 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 hard to make that dialogue work. So that's great. Or just like standing by the water cooler and in the background it's just like no you will die. So that was my morning. But as far as the rest of the week goes, I made a discovery this week. I
Oh
found
yeah.
this show, and I love it to death. It's so good. I had never heard of it before. It's this tiny little. It's actually an Adult Swim show, believe it or not, but it's not animated. It's live action.
Oh
Have you ever heard of the comedian Joe Para?
no, I haven't.
Yeah, I hadn't either. I came across him on YouTube. He doesn't have a lot of stuff out there, but he has a couple YouTube videos, and then he has this called Joe Para Talks with You, and it is amazing. It's
Huh.
just this guy, and he's a character comedian. So his character is like this really old. He's not old. He's like a young guy, like young 30s. But his behavior, he behaves like an old man, and he lives in like this tiny little town in like northern Michigan, and he's very very midwestern, and he's very like very closed off, and he's like, "Hello, I'm Joe Para. Today I'm going to talk to you about rocks. I like rocks." And he does this thing with his voice. He's like, "I'm Joe Para." It's perfect. It's it's an Adult Swim show, but it is so aggressively wholesome. It is the most wholesome thing that I have ever seen put out by Adult Swim. It is adorable. It's only like 10-minute episodes long. It's a really quick watch. I watched it all in one night. It is just really cute and wholesome, but also funny. I highly, highly recommend it. And
Okay.
it's all available for free on Adult Swim. Can't beat that.
Nice.
Can't beat that. All right. Unless you have anything else to say. Oh, and I started watching Tuca and Birdie too, but I only just started it, so I'll probably have more to say about it next
Yeah,
week.
so definitely let that show sink in a bit after a
Yeah,
couple
no, I'm
episodes.
I'm only like 2-3 episodes in, so I can't really say much about it. So yeah, next week, stay tuned. But anyway,
What?
Hansel and Gretel.
Whew.
Yeah. So here's the problem with this movie. This is a hard episode for us to do, or at least for me. It was a hard thing, like for me to come up with ideas, because I had one like approach that I was gonna argue this on, and then today it kind of dawned on me why this doesn't work. I mean, obviously, dialogue is awful.
Mm-hmm.
The editing is awful.
There's
The
a little Baz
soundtrack,
Luhrmann in the beginning.
yeah, the soundtrack is awful. It's like an edge lord's like it's just all this like unnecessary like heavy metal stuff and like screamo. I mean, not a lot of that. It's that's just where my mind goes. And like, there's just like little points where they like insert like swears where you're like they just don't feel right. It's not like I have anything against swearing, obviously, but like it just doesn't. It feels like they're just trying to be edgy. Like in the beginning, where she's just like, is it hot enough for you, bitch? Like I literally wrote in my notes, ooh, she said
Yeah.
bitch. Like that's the it feels like a third grader trying to swear for the first time.
Mm.
Um, that said, my normal the normal thing that we and this show like to harp on, because it's something that at least for me is easy, is plot. You know, we look at the plots, we tear them apart, we find these weird ass plots that don't fit, and we try to improve them. At first I thought the plot is not the problem here at all. As far as like the premise and all of the like, you know, the premise of them as witch hunters, that all seems it seems fine on first glance. But then I was thinking about it today, right? And it dawned on me. The plot is too good. It's too good for what this movie is trying to be. This movie is trying to be absurd, and it is not absurd at all. So when I first heard about this movie, and I did not see this when it came out. When did this come out? Like 10, not 10 years ago.
2013.
Yeah, so only 6 years ago. It looks a lot older than it is. Like this movie, I think this movie is like 9 years younger than Van Helsing,
I was gonna say it
which
reminds me a lot of Van Helsing.
exactly. It doesn't look it. It looks like this looks like a sequel to Van Helsing that came out the next year.
Hmm.
I guess the CG is better. I mean that you don't really notice it, but like the editing is terrible and all the dialogue is worse. Like it doesn't it feels, but also not just that, like the edginess, the music, like it all feels like something out of like the mid Bush administration where everybody was like starting to be a little edgy and like like you know whining about shit. And like no, this came out in the 2010s. This doesn't feel like a 2010s movie.
Yeah.
um
The biggest thing that I always found was, yeah, it had all this grittiness and whatnot, and I kept asking myself throughout the entire movie, was this movie trying to take itself seriously or not? Because honestly, throughout there was points throughout the movie where it was like, okay, by the way, audience, we have a plot, and even though I think it's a simplistic plot myself, but it's okay, audience, we do have this plot, we do have characters that are trying to solve a problem, and then you sprinkle bits of these comedic moments inside, like the cursing and a bunch of the like slapstick, and the fact that the witches have the same martial arts capacities as like black belts for some reason. But it, so like part of me is like, oh, okay, is it just bad pacing? Is it bad other stuff? And I really wanted to, if I was steered in a specific direction, I could have been sort of okay with it. But the fact that it sort of sat on the fence this whole time, I was a little uncomfortable about that. So
right.
it got me really. Well, one, it was hard for the pitch to write a pitch for this because of the fact that it was like, okay, do I write something that is supposed
I
to take itself
barely did,
seriously?
I'll be honest.
Yeah, and so because like you want to capture the essence of the movie, and that's sort of like what we try to do is capture the essence of the movie and try to repeat it in a better way. But when the fact is when the essence or the quote unquote essence of the movie is it's either taking itself too seriously or it's a satire and it's completely aware of how like cringy and edgelord it is, you kind of want to root for the latter, you know. So the other thing I want to talk about is the fact that I want to nitpick this movie so bad. I want to screen doctor it, and I know that's not the point of this podcast, and I'm not going to do it. But that's how like if I were to sum this movie up into one word, it's potential. And
Yes.
I did like the plot. I liked it was simplistic. There's some things I want to change about it that would make it sort of complex, but it's not necessary. Like I could still watch the same plot and enjoy it. And I think it's the reason why we see that it has sort of a coin flip on the IMDb is because I think people just understand that it's a simple plot. It's just something to sit down, relax, and just enjoy with a bunch of friends. And I see the sprinklings of potential throughout this entire movie, and I want to nitpick on all the small things because it's like, oh, if I changed like this small thing, it would like enhance the movie, and I wish I could, but at the same time, I think, you know what, it's not going to save the movie. It's not going to save the movie because if you have a lot of small things sprinkled throughout the movie, and you're trying to fix every single individual one, and I'm pretty sure the movie's doomed to begin with.
Right. Well, I mean, the reason I say that I like the plot, it's not because it's like a super complex plot. It is a simple plot. But I think in a lot of cases simple plots are fine. You
Yeah,
know,
they
it's
work.
it's what you're looking for. And I think that this simple plot would have worked perfectly within the context of a movie that I'm not saying it took himself like gravely seriously, but it wasn't trying to like so, honestly something like Van Helsing would have been fine, but I don't think that's what they were going for. I think they were going more for like the dark comedy kind of thing.
Okay.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I know I am wrong, but like when you think of this movie, right? What the other movies that come to mind for you is like Van Helsing and the Brothers
Brothers
Grimm and that.
Grimm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so for me, because I did not see this movie at the time, and I didn't see any of these movies, the movies that come to mind when I think of this are Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter,
Mm-hmm.
and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And I, for the longest time, thought it was like all the same series and like they were related. These movies are not actually related. They came out around the same time, but Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies are both based on books by the same author. This movie is not based on a book. And if you think about it, it makes sense that it doesn't really fit, even though it thematically, if you didn't know anything about them, you think, oh yeah, it fits in that vein, but it doesn't really. And here's why: it's not ridiculous enough. It's not nearly ridiculous enough. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is completely insane because, like, you know, we have an image in our head of who Abraham Lincoln was, and he wasn't a friggin' vampire hunter. And you know, it like lampoons the idea of American history by like bringing that into it, and it's a lot of fun. I like that movie a lot. And I've never actually seen Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but it's the same concept. I you know,
Yeah.
it's a little bit more absurd because like even though Abraham Lincoln obviously wasn't a vampire hunter, we do have an image in our mind of him as this like badass like log cabin frontier dude. So like taking that and putting it with vampires, that's kind of neat. But like Pride and Prejudice is like literally just a prim and proper
The British
bronze.
posh.
Yes, exactly. And then you put zombies into that. It's perfect. For this movie, it's not nearly as much of a leap. Because think about it, right? Hansel and Gretel, I keep saying Gretel, Hansel and Gretel.
It's a good place, but yeah.
Shout out to Rutgers. No, the Hansel and Gretel already were like they were kids. They were captured by a witch. They killed the witch when they were kids. So it's not really that much of a leap to then go say, okay, they became vampire hunters. There's no like suspension there. It's not absurd in any way. It's just kind of they're just trying to make a an old nursery rhyme, which you know itself is already pretty dark because of course old time nursery rhymes were pretty dark, but they're trying to like make it gritty and grow it up and kind of like just turn what is already a fairly dark fairy tale into an action movie. So and maybe this is just my mistake. Maybe everybody, you know, nobody out there associates this movie with those other two movies. But in my mind, they were all kind of in the same vein. And so watching this, you know, I had heard it was a bad movie, so I wasn't expecting anything great. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't as ridiculous. The only like ridiculous thing was at the end where she brings out like the minigun, and like I don't know. I didn't
Well,
think it.
yeah, and this is why like I sort of like draw those conclusions to sort of sitting on the fence because yeah, it's not really that absurd to think of Hansel and Gretel, you know, being traumatized of this witch and then having them go out and hunt witches. It's so like that premise itself, it brings in that sort of Van Helsing as like dark, very dark action supernatural movie, and then you do things like you give Hansel diabetes, and then you give the
That was crazy.
yeah,
I like how they never like mentioned it's diabetes, and then they're
the sugar
like,
sickness.
yeah, and he's like, I actually, you know, I non ironically, I appreciated that. I'm like, okay, that's kind of clever.
And
Get a
then
little bit of representation in there for our diabetic friends.
yeah, and then but then also the fact that like, well, first of all, they never hit a bullet. I think they hit the bullet once. Actually, they use the guns as melee weapons more than
Oh
they
my
actually
god, the
shoot.
guns are so ridiculous. What
Yes.
is that thing that he's holding? That with the
It's supposed to be it's just a rifle. It's not even a shotgun. It's a single caliber, and then the crossbow that folds into two to
What
hit
is
the
with that?
side. I mean,
Yeah,
the weapons are
I
ridiculous.
they were going for fun there, and like, so you don't want to nitpick that to death. Like, you look at that and you're like, obviously that's not how a crossbow works. That can't happen that way. But like, who cares? That's fun. Like, I don't care if the movie was all that, then that's fine. But they tried to like weave in
A
little
serious
like,
plot, like
yeah, and
oh, your
they're
mother
like,
was a great white witch, and
yeah, and there are some places where like that's pretty well exemplified in like one little scene. Like the part where the red-haired witch forces the boy to shoot his mom, which is like completely tiny scene. They're not important characters at all, but it's part and parcel of what's the problem with this movie. Cuz like he's turning and he's like all sad and he's like, "Oh my god, no, no." And his mom's like, "No, don't do it." And you're like, "Oh my god, he's going to shoot his mom and he has no control." And then she flies out the window, and it's like any depth, any character like portrayal that you wanted to do in that scene flew out the window with the mom. Like, what the hell was that?
And I want to contrast that a bit because yeah, a lot of the fight scenes were on the verge of comical and cartoonish, but they were so visceral at the same time. I mean, we're seeing like this body horror, we're seeing just gore and everything's and whatnot. And a lot of the fights, like when people hit the ground, they hit the ground hard. So
Right.
you feel for these characters, but then at the same time, somebody gets launched out of a window or like kicked off the midget witch gets like kicked off a cliff, and you're like, Jesus. So that's what I'm like. I have that hard time is trying to like be both a serious, dark.
That's just why this movie just feels so out of place.
It does.
I already said that this movie feels like something that should have been made in 2004. Like that, it's that kind of like edgelord kind of crap back from when everyone was listening to Good Charlotte. Like, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think if it just went in one direction, I think this movie would have been a lot better if they either went for the serious dark direction and made the fights like almost Dark Knight-esque, or they could have went in the other direction and just sort of satirized that genre. Because I guess like around the Van Helsing time, there was a lot of different movies that captured that sort of low budget monster film, like in the woods and shit like that. So I think if it just picked the direction and went with it, it would have been fine. But it tried to do everything and like go back and forth.
Let's talk about characters for a little while.
Sure.
What did we think of these? Like before I even saw this movie, a complaint that I had heard in the YouTube and online circles that I frequent is the usage of Gretel and how she's like just this constant damsel in distress.
She's a plot device that's trying to be. Yeah, she's supposed to be like this rough and tough girl. Obviously, I think that Hansel is more of the comic relief character. He's always getting drunk. He's always stumbling.
That's what kind of like confuses this a little bit, because I went into this thinking like, oh god, Gretel's gonna just be like this. Like it's gonna be awful depiction. Actually, no. I think Gemma Arterton does a pretty good job of having a fairly badass Gretel. Like she depicts her pretty well, and I think that is fine. But the issue is the circumstances that they put her in. Like she is in the hands of a captor more times than she's not. Like she changes hands 4 different times in this movie, where she's just like, okay, she gets knocked out, so the boy takes her home, and like, yeah, he's not capturing her, but still, like, she is in the possession of a man, and then she gets captured by the 4 dudes, the sheriff and his goons, and that scene was rough.
Yeah, and it was such bad timing. At the same time in which she's about to be almost raped, you keep cutting back and forth to a scene where Hansel's doing this nice consensual bathing with the red-haired witch, or the good witch, and it's like, oh, he's having this great time. He's like, he's trying to find love, like he's forming this relationship, and then it cuts to Gretel just getting punched over and over by these 4 men, and then almost raped, and it's just like, they're not. You can have both scenes not together, not on a back and forth.
And well, they did that contrast on purpose. I just don't think.
I don't think it was an appropriate sort of concept. Yeah.
Well, we had the extended cut because I was looking it up on Wikipedia later. The that is not, we don't have, this was not the cut that went to theaters. The cut that went to
Ah.
theaters, that she's still like brutalized, but she's not almost raped. And
Mm-hmm.
the scene where the sheriff shoots the mayor in the face,
Mm-hmm.
that's also not in
In the actual release.
in the theater release. Yeah. So,
Okay.
but whatever. I mean, that doesn't save it. Like it's still. And then she gets captured by the giant, and he's nice to her, but he still captures her. And then she's freed, and like they're like, all right, we have our mission now. We're gonna go out and fight. And she gets captured again by the witches. It's like she's like Princess Peach. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's too much. It's not. It's just like, why can't he get captured?
He got
And
captured by a tree.
yeah,
With his, he got
I
captured
don't.
by diabetes. That's what ended up happening.
And then there's the issue, right, of just like the idea of the way witchcraft is depicted in this movie. So, I originally, when I didn't really have much of a pitch, I thought that I would just talk about like witchcraft and like the historical implications of witchcraft and basic and all that stuff. So, I have you ever heard of a YouTuber named Oliver Thorne? He makes videos under the channel Philosophy Tube.
That sounds familiar. I think I've stumbled across it.
I just started getting into him because he's like a, I don't want to say frequent collaborator, but an occasional collaborator with ContraPoints.
Mm-hmm.
But he did a whole video that I rewatched today in preparation for this about witchcraft and like the witch trials of the late Middle Ages in Europe and the American colonies, and how they're kind of like a an attempt by a newly like an attempt by an economy that is transitioning into capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
to enforce very rigid gender roles for women, to kind of like, because before the idea, before the concept of capitalism put everything in a role of like everyone works for someone else, women, they actually had a more, I don't want to say rights, but they had more roles in society. And like magic, which obviously there's not really much room for magic anymore, but magic was within their realm. Like the idea of like fortune telling and healing, and even like midwifery, which isn't, we don't think about that as magical now. That's actually a very important service, but in that time it kind of all blended together. And the push for witch hunts was really a way to like suppress that, and to force women into like the traditional capitalist ideology of like women in the home. So I don't want to say that I expected this movie to address that, because obviously it's not going to. But I was a little disappointed that, like, in the beginning when they saved the Good Witch, I thought, maybe there's some potential for this movie to maybe defend the idea of witchcraft, and kind of like explain away that like this hysteria that you're seeing, the mass hysteria, is taking the problems of the masses out on women who, obviously aren't the causes, but are just scapegoats. If you have ever like read anything about the Salem witch trials, a lot of it had to do with ergot disease, which was like hallucinations that people had because of um, tainted rye
Oh.
that they were harvesting. And so they all got this disease called ergot, and they had these hallucinations, so they blamed it on teenage girls because they couldn't find a better, they were just a scapegoat. And that's kind of been like the dark history of witchcraft. Obviously witchcraft is pretty dark, but like that it is really just a a kind of a scapegoating of women for the problems of society. And I don't really think this movie was gonna address it. But like I would have, you can dream, right? I think one thing, piece of uh, contemporary popular culture that kind of touches a little bit on it is the new. Sabrina the Teenage Witch remake on Netflix. Have you ever
Okay.
given that a watch? I think that's a good show. I think it obviously much better than the original because that show is just a stupid sitcom. This has a decent amount of like intrigue and dark like undertones. The problem I think though with that show is that they try to play it both ways a little bit, where they do kind of represent the women in the coven as like being like having these special powers and this special connection to like Satan and all that, but at the same time they try to reinforce like a patriarchy within the coven so that Sabrina has something to fight back against.
Mm.
And it's like, well, what are you trying to be here? Are you trying to represent witchcraft as this like thing outside of the patriarchy, or is it itself patriarchal? Because like can't have it both ways. What are you criticizing here? So
Uh,
it is what it is. In the end, when it turned out that the good witch was in fact a witch, it kind of undermined that whole scene where they're like, okay, you know, we need to hunt the witches. That's fine, but we can't go around accusing every young woman of being a witch. And then lo and behold, she was a witch. She was a good witch, but like they were right about her being a witch, and
yeah.
I just think that kind of undermines that whole message.
Well, I think that brings us to. I mean, if we have nothing else to sort of say, because like again, I can nitpick a lot of the small things that I wouldn't find like good in the movie, but it's as good as the sum of its parts. So like, there's no way I can like nitpick the small things and then say, well, it wasn't necessary for the entire film, because I guess it's sort of in its own cheesy way. Everything sort of adds up together to make a cheesy film, but without further ado, would you like to get into the pitches?
Yeah, mine are fairly simple. I mean, I can give A, and then you can do one, and then I can do B if you want, or you can do yours. It doesn't really matter.
Well,
Um,
I'll get mine out of the way because
yeah,
it's
go for it. Go for it.
so for this I wanna steer into the seriousness of the movie, not sort of the comedy aspects. Although I do like the shovel scene. That's probably the best scene the scene in the movie where
Which one is that?
so after kicking the witch inside the candy hut near the end of the movie, and after the good witch dies, Hansel turns towards the camera, looks at it, and it's all serious as like I'm gonna finish her off. Right, and it's like after this nice little quote unquote speech with the good witch, and she dies, and he's like, "I'm gonna go get her now," and then so he does like a Rambo style dodge roll into the house, about to be all epic, and then all of a sudden the Grand Witch turns and hits him in the face with a shovel, and it's the greatest subversion of that trope that I've seen in a while, and I'm pissed off that it's in that kind of movie because it's such a good scene and
I think
it doesn't fit.
that's the kind of thing that this whole movie could be.
I know.
That's like if that's what they're trying to do, great. Give me more of that.
I know.
Also, by the way, before you get back into it,
Sure,
something
sure.
I forgot to mention on the nitpicky side. What was with that intro outro like Jeremy Renner little creation thing like that? I don't know. That was not necessary at all, and it kind of was stupid. I know that's not high hitting criticism there. It was stupid, but like they introduced it at the beginning. It's like four lines that did not need to exist because you totally explain all of that in the intro with all the news articles, which was pretty good, honestly. And then they brought it back again at the end just to be like, oh, by the way, we have a narrator for some reason, and it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, it's like, remember this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So this kind of patronizes the audience, and you're just like,
Yeah.
you know,
You need a really good reason to have a narrator, and this movie did not even come close.
it's like the same thing. It's like it's like the same thing near the end where Hansel's right is just about to kill the Grand Witch, and then finally, after eons of movie time, his diabetes kicks in at that moment and says, "By the way, you didn't take your medication. You know, right when you're about to kill this witch." Even though he was hanging on a tree for forever and like through the entire night
Yeah,
unconscious.
I had. I mean, you could maybe imply that the good witch gave him some insulin, or maybe she gave her like gave him
She
some
could
magical
she
insulin.
could have healed his diabetes for all like
Yeah,
so
come on, man.
that's
You have magical powers. You're gonna let this guy walk around with diabetes? That's not very nice.
the sugar sickness. But anyway, it's like that's there's some moments of gold in there that I love to see in a comedy movie, like a dark comedy. And that's what makes me upset about this movie because it could have just steered into that, and I would have loved it. But so anyway, I wanted to steer into the seriousness of the movie, and I wanted to make it sort of a serial killer mystery, where you have three types of witches. You have the one bad witch, about three or four neutral witches that just want to be left alone to practice their mysticism and spiritualism, and one good witch, which is she practices her domain of healing magic and whatnot. And they're all sort of secretive because they just want to be left alone. They don't want to be caught. They don't want to be burned at the stake. And then this bad witch comes in and says, well, I found a way to make us immune to fire. Because I like that premise. That's a good premise. I have a way to make us immune to fire. However, it involves us killing children. And now these neutral witches have a choice to make. They have to either stay in hiding and risk, being exposed and murdered, or they can side with this bad witch and murder children, but now they'll survive. And that's a good little dilemma for the witch, and it sort of humanizes them a bit. They're not all bad. They're just doing what they need to do to survive. So obviously the four witches who do they have their little domains like the nature, the alchemy, there's one really good on a broomstick and stuff, and one's really good with a wand. And so you can have that sort of thing. And all of them side with the bad witch. And then this introduces the rot aspect, which I liked as well, because let's say if you're more of an evil witch, you're going to have more rot on you. And then so these women who just started the malicious witchcraft, they'll start getting the rot. And for about a quarter of the movie, they're trying to cover up the rot, and they're thinking, oh, it's just like bad dental, or it's just a rash, and they're trying to blend into society still. So this is all sort of happening inside the village, and then as the time goes by, it's harder for them to sort of cover that up, and then it's not till about halfway through the film that Hansel and Gretel actually come in, and they're more plot devices rather than sort of characters, but we still see them as sort of protagonists, and then they go out and they have to solve why these children are going missing. So you have that dark aspect. Obviously, these children are getting murdered, but instead of dealing with the hundreds of witches at the end, like you see in the final fight, you're dealing with about 4 to 5 specific characters as witches, and then one of the good ones who helps. She's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll take the risk of being found out. I don't want to murder children and whatnot. So you have like the righteous witch, but it doesn't seem like too out there as far as like characteristics go. And then you have these other 4, which are sympathetic. They just want to survive, and they're willing to break a few eggs in order to survive. And then finally, we sort of have and it turns into a serial killer thing. And then finally, Hansel and Gretel, who aren't competent, or who are actually competent with fighting and stuff like that, they have to beat these witches in their own way, in their own domain. So like they have to have a different strategy killing the nature witch as they would the alchemy witch and stuff like that. So you have these, instead of having this long-winded like generic fights that happen throughout the movie, you have these like 4 or 5 good fights that are specific. They have to solve a problem for each fight, and it gets really personal, and it's nice. I want that sort of thing. I want the close quarters of one-on-one fights with some problem solving, rather than just let me set up these garrote wires in the tree for a couple hours and hopefully they'll run into them because they're dumb. And then finally the final boss, sort of that aspect where both of them, with Hansel and Gretel, team up together with the good witch. The good witch sacrifices herself because she knows that her life is bigger. The savior of the village is bigger than her life, and then she does that, and all the children who were about to be murdered are saved. And I think that would be a good way to sort of end that aspect. And that's more of like steering into the seriousness of the movie. And you can sort of have that aspect of sort of espionage. You're trying to solve that serial killer, quote unquote, witch hunt. But this seems more like humanistic things that you want them to sort of survive, but at the same time you're like, I understand why you're doing this, but you can't. That's wrong still. So I think that's how I would do that.
Well, I like that a lot. I didn't even think I didn't really mess with the witches that much, and I think that I would keep that. Especially the idea of them being like neutral witches who just want to like do their thing and then have to like do what they need to do to survive. It kind of
it's just a practice of spiritualism or mysticism.
Yeah, it kind of like touches on my like early capitalist criticism of witch trials and all that. I figured that like you, that I figured there were two ways you can take this, right? And I didn't really expunge too much on like the ridiculous side, but I think that if you were to make this ridiculous, can't really be Hansel and Gretel because, like I said earlier, Hansel and Gretel as witch hunters, it's not really that much of a leap. It kind of makes too much sense for something that's supposed to be like absurdist. So if you really want it to be absurdist, you got to find somebody else, some other literary figure who's like a little more, uh, you know, innocent and not like connected directly to witches, and be like, oh, and now they're witch hunters, to like be more like a Abraham Lincoln thing or Pride and
Okay.
Prejudice and whatever. But that's that. I'll say that in case anyone wants to come up with that, or if we would come back to that. My real pitch, also like you, is more along the serious side. I wanted to play a little bit around with what they did with Hansel and Gretel and like their backstory, because I actually like that in a way. I actually like that twist that like their mother was a witch, and she used her power to make them like immune to magic. And I actually really like the idea of spell immunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that not enough is done with that in fantasy as far as I'm concerned. Like if I were to write like a fantasy thing, I would think it'd be really cool to have like an entire like society that revolves around the use of magic, and the hero can't use magic but also is completely immune to it. And like everyone's like, whoa, someone who's immune to magic, that's crazy. And so like all these magical creatures have to try and use like physical means to kill him, and they're just like not used to that. So I like that aspect. I would harp on that a little bit, but I would also I also would kind of, I would leave Hansel the way he is for the most part, and kind of tweak Gretel a little bit so that she's not like constantly getting captured. Um, so I kind of rested on my laurels a little bit. I wanna make this more of like a, almost like another superhero origin story.
Okay.
Um, and this, so in our second episode, if any of you have been listening that long, we teased the our remade Dark Universe. Now, I actually think that this fits in fairly well there. That last scene where they go into like they go to fight a witch in the desert. I'm just sitting there thinking like, are they going to meet up with Tom Cruise now? Like, uh, so I'm not going to play into that specifically, but I think that this would be a really fun place for us to launch our own thing that I've been cooking up in my head for a long time now. And this is just the first entry into it. Don't worry, I'm not going to sit here for 15 minutes and go on and on and on about like all these movies ideas like I had in that other episode. This is just our Iron Man. This is our public domain cinematic universe. And so it functions similarly to what we have in this movie, but little changes I want to make. I don't want to make Gretel get captured 1,000 times. I actually want to have the witches capture like a little girl that she got really close to earlier in the movie. Like I will introduce this little girl character, maybe even take the place of the what's that kid, like the fan kid, what's his name? I
Ben,
don't
I
know.
believe.
He's the adoring fan. He's just like,
Yeah.
he walks, is like, oh my god, you're Hansel and Gretel. But yeah, he wasn't actually British. That's another thing. The accents in this movie were weird because there weren't any actual British actors except for Gemma Arterton, and she was doing an American accent in fantasy. Where are the British accents? But anyway, that's not important. Replace him with a little girl, right? And then she gets captured, and like Hansel and Gretel go to save the little girl, and Gretel realizes that they didn't actually want the little girl. They only captured the little girl to try and lure her out. And then she, rather than getting captured and being a damsel in distress, she actually like gives herself up to the witches to save the little girl. And obviously she doesn't get sacrificed. She survives in the end. But like you can still have that little device of her like, you know, being in danger of being sacrificed because she of her like white witch powers, but you can give her a little bit more agency in it and have it be a choice of hers to save someone.
Okay.
Also, I want her to do more magic herself because she is a witch, and I think they find that out a little too late. I'd rather have them find that out like in the middle, and then like at some point she acquires a wand, and like, oh my god, she can do magic. And then, so then we go into, we end this with them like going into the desert, and it sets them up for whatever we want to do with them in the future if later we come across some nice public domain stuff. And also, I think we should recast it, because I think it would be extremely cruel to have an entire new cinematic universe where Jeremy Renner is the one without powers, because that's just not right.
Well, I mean, these are they're all based around the Grimm fairy tales. So like you could have technically a Grimm universe. You have things like Red Riding Hood, the Gingerbread Man,
Right, but I
things
don't
like
I don't
that.
want to keep it in Grimm. I want it just to be all whole public domain.
Oh,
So if
okay, just in general.
somewhere along the line, if we do a Peter Pan, or no, that's Disney. Robin Hood.
Robin Hood. Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking Green Hat. But yeah, if we cover Robin Hood for some reason, I can throw him in there. He's like a go-to. Maybe some King Arthur. Maybe who knows. Um, but yeah, if you do keep Jeremy Renner, give him a gun for the entire movie, and then like in one of the last scenes you give him a bow and arrow, and like you zoom out and he has the bow and arrow, and it was like, oh my god, that would be cool.
That's some fan service right there.
Yeah, you know what you got to do.
Okay, yeah, it definitely, yeah, it definitely set itself up for going into, because I mean when you think of witchcraft, there's such a wide range of things you could do with witches, and the fact of combating witches. So I mean the potential there is just
Yeah,
is endless.
and it felt like they did so little with it. All the witches were pretty much the same. I mean, yeah, in the end they showed all the like various looking witches, but they're all just like ugly demon things.
Yeah,
Like,
just deformed. Like again, the whole idea of witchcraft was secrecy, and the
right.
idea of not being found, and there was that whole idea of like we don't know who's a witch, and I wish they could have played into that.
Yeah, and like that also, it makes me like think more of your neutral witches. Well, like I don't really want my witches to be demons. I want there to be a little bit more nuance there. I want you to think like, you know, is it really the witches that are wrong, or is it this society that is so repressive? Like
Yeah.
maybe the witches were the friends we made along the way, like that kind of thing.
Well, let's say I started asking this question during the first when they killed the first witch. They just literally went to a random house trying to find these kids, and they just killed the witch there. And it's like, okay, fine, the witch is evil, but at least I want to, as an audience member, I want to see her choose to be evil.
Right.
I want that. I just want that sort of thing, figured for me. I just don't want them to come in and just murder somebody and just be like, yeah, because she's evil. Because look at her face. But I want to see her choose that evil, and then have her be punished for it.
Yeah, because otherwise she's not really a witch. She's more like a demon, and
Or
like demons are boring.
yeah,
It's okay. They're not as boring as ninjas.
even though,
I hope one day we get into something that will really allow me to express my absolute hatred for the use of ninjas.
so we'll have to find some movie.
Yeah.
But as far as do you have anything else, or shall we pick the next movie?
No, I'm fine with ending my pitch on just the image of Jeremy Renner getting handed a bow and arrow. I think that's exactly how I wanted this week to go. So yeah, as far as other movies, I know you have a list. I had a couple of ideas today. They're kind of just out of nowhere, and maybe not even possible. Have you ever seen the movie Hamlet 2?
Hamlet 2. I have not.
I haven't either, but like I've always wanted to, and I don't know. Maybe it'll be too good for us to cover.
Is that
but,
like the Shakespeare's Hamlet?
Well, that's the thing. It's this ridiculous Steve Coogan spoof movie where he's a high school a high school drama teacher who writes a play called Hamlet 2 about like Hamlet and Jesus traveling through time, and like it's just like extremely obscene, and everyone tries to like get him shut down. It kind of functions as like a criticism of like Bush era religious values, but like I think it could be interesting, but I've never seen it, so maybe it's too good for this. I don't know. I don't even know. You know what? I'm gonna pop on and see what I know I don't like aggregate sites, but just just for this case.
Okay, so while you're doing that, I'll recommend a couple because I have a giant list and I have them marked by asterisks of like its
89%
potential.
on Rotten Tomatoes. That might be too good.
Yeah, it might be hard. See, I always find it's really hard to remake something that's already kind of good unless you do it in like a completely different direction. Uh, but then it's sort of like making it better. I don't know.
All I know is like the big like musical number from the play they make is rock me, sexy Jesus."
That's where that
So
comes from.
yes,
Okay.
I've always wanted to watch that movie. Maybe I'll just see it on my own time. But anyway,
So
go ahead.
the ones I would have would be Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and the
I'm
whole
sorry, you just cut out right
ah,
there.
damn. Okay.
No, you didn't actually cut out. I'm sorry. I pretend that movie doesn't exist. Maybe I
Okay.
shouldn't. This might not be the best time for that
So,
joke.
okay. Then this next one would be Indiana Jones and Aliens, um, Hoodwinked.
I was actually just thinking about Hoodwinked.
This was actually because you recommended it last time.
Oh, okay.
But yes, because I went back and I saw the trailer and I was like, oh, yeah, it's sort of an under the rug movie. We're coming from Hansel and Gretel, going into.
I
the
loved
sort of-
that movie when I was a kid.
Yeah, same. And I thought it was a really. I mean, I think we both saw it, so coming up with something would be pretty good. And yeah, it's a good transition into from Hansel and Gretel. The other ones would be. I don't know how big you're into Slender Man, but that movie was terrible.
Ooh.
But
I'll put a bookmark on that. I like the idea there.
Okay, so that would be actually our first horror movie.
We've done horror movies, not like horror movies, but like
That's what I'm saying. Like this would be our first like actual horror movie.
wasn't technically The Purge a horror movie?
Nah, it's more like thriller. And then we have the Lorax, the Dungeons and Dragons movie, and Master of Disguise. Those are the ones that stick out to me.
Oh, those are some contenders right there.
Yep.
Master of Disguise is another one that I actually really liked that movie
It's a
when it
guilty
came
pleasure
out.
of mine,
'Cause,
yeah.
well, I was like what? Like when did that movie come out? Hold on.
I'm not sure. I believe I was like 12.
There's Bush stuff in it, so it can't be Master of Disguise. 2002. So
Okay.
I was 9. I was 9. I was 9 when that movie came out.
I think I saw it when I was 12 because we got it on DVD.
Oh, I totally saw that in the theaters at least once. I was obsessed with the little turtle thing.
Yeah. But it's like part of me is like I don't want to remake that because I think it's just like it's like The Room. You just want to like it's a little gem, just a little guilty pleasure gem that you just want to. But I say no movie can be protected. If we have to do it, we have to do it. And then finally, there was one more, the Emoji Movie, because
Ooh,
it was
I've
so
never seen
bad.
that.
It apparently is so bad. It's one of the worst. But can you actually make a good emoji movie? Because I think it's possible. I think it would be a good commentary on how we communicate with one another, like the evolution of our communication and how that could actually you can actually form a plot around somebody like maybe falling back to traditional stuff to get their maybe there's a misunderstanding, but anyway, I don't want to get into that because we're not actually doing the movie yet unless we pick it. So I think we have so many different options.
I just have one more that I want to add to the fray,
Sure.
and this we would not be able to do like a normal episode. We would have to change our tone entirely. Because I was thinking about it today with the Star Wars movie. Star Wars: The Third Gathers, Backstroke of the West. What we would have to do is treat it like it was an actual movie and just pretend that it's not related to Star Wars.
Okay.
But that could be a fun little challenge if we ever want to, embark on that.
That'd be a good April Fool's one.
Yeah, it's gonna be a while. I think the last 3 that you said were really. I liked Slender Man. I liked Master of Disguise. I think there was one more that you said.
Dungeons and Dragons, the Lorax, and the Emoji Movie.
The Emoji. Yeah, see, I like all of those. If you want to pick whichever one of those is your favorite, I think the Lorax is the only one I wouldn't. I mean, I would do it, but
Well,
I
let's
think I have as much to say about it.
well, none of it. I know I haven't seen the Slender Man movie. I heard it was bad, and neither of us have seen the Emoji Movie. I just heard it was bad, like terrible. So I would do either those two because then we're seeing it for the first time. We get those initial reactions, and I think at least for the Emoji Movie, when a movie's so bad, you pretty much have a limited potential on how you can remake it. And then with Slender Man, same thing, except with a horror movie. But that also has a bit of culture behind it. So
And there are examples of good Slender Man movies. They just don't happen to be film releases. They're just YouTube videos.
yeah,
I think I'm leaning towards Emoji.
okay. So let's do for all of our viewers out there. Next week will be the Emoji Movie. Dear God, try to find it for free. That's the only thing I can. I don't know. Can I say
bake
that?
some tortillas.
Yeah. Try to borrow it from a friend or something like that.
Yeah.
But until then, Joe, do you have any final words?
No, I'm good. Just, go out there and watch Joe Parra Talks with you because it'll help you get to sleep and it'll put a smile on your face. So.
Okay. Well, until then, we will see you all next time. Goodbye, everyone.
See ya.